Before I begin, yesterday marked the 41st year since the takeover of CCNY, which was part of the struggle for open admissions. And because of yesterday marked that, there were a number of actions that took place at CCNY, and there are actions that are taking place at Brooklyn College and Hunter College today. One of the actions that happened is there was, after the demonstration at CCNY, there was a school protest out in front of PS 123, which is a co-location school. Co-location means there's a public school, and then there's this cancer growing within a public school that's called a charter school that's growing and eating up the resources and eventually will lead to the public school being kicked out. And that was mainly students, 6th, 7th grade students, some younger than that, protesting against the charter schools and their space taking up their resources, and even got to yell at and argue with the principal of the school, who dared come out with one of his cronies and videotape people because they say they want to learn the issues, which is really they just want to see who the faces are, who's in the protest, so they can respond to them later. They know the issues. People are fighting against the privatization of their public school system and the taking of their resources. It's as simple as that. I bring that up just because what happened in Bangladesh was the panels that I took part in, and the main demonstration was to demand the right for education for all people and against the commercialization and privatization of the public education system around the world. The way that, first, for those who are not in the know, actually, before I even begin with that, people probably haven't seen me for a very long time. I may look like a stranger to some of you. I probably am a stranger to some of you. Some of you probably thought that I defected and left New York City. No. I may have thought about it, but I'm back. I don't even remember. That's how tired I am. But not only was I in Bangladesh, and that was 10 days, 2 days travel, 8 days in the country, but in Colorado, where there was actually Virginia before Bangladesh for 3 days, where there was an action against the announcement, the proposal for the state budget that was going to cut over $1 billion away from social services in Virginia. And now we know that the governor of Virginia has started this racist holiday called Confederate History Month. And then I went to Bangladesh after that, and I went to Colorado after returning from Bangladesh, where there was a meeting on Mumia, which was a very good meeting, a large meeting, and they are planning an action on April 26th in support of the action in D.C. To call for Mumia to be released. And for those who don't know, there is the Supermax in Colorado, where they have a number of, Ricardo Palmero is in Supermax, Colorado, Larry Hoover, who was one of the founders of the Black Disciples. There's a lot of political prisoners that are actually in the Supermax in Florence, Colorado, which is about 3 hours, I think, south of Denver, Colorado. And it's one of the remaining Supermaxes that exist. And then I was in California, where there was an anti-Nazi rally. There was 40, 50 Nazis that dared show up with their swastikas, and there were 1,000 protesters. And I actually witnessed 2 of the Nazis fall down and hurt themselves repeatedly on the concrete, and having to be led away by the Los Angeles Department of Pigs to protect them from their own stupidity. I mean, what do you think when you come into an action with thousands of people who hate you, despise you? You think that they're just going to let you walk through their action and say, hey, how you doing? Have a good afternoon? Hell no. So the way that first Comrade Sarah Flounders and Michael Kramer last year in December, around my birthday, I will never forget that, they went to Bangladesh to participate in the second conference of the Socialist Party of Bangladesh. And this is a start of a building. The Socialist Party of Bangladesh and the Socialist Students Front know a great deal about Workers' World Party and about FIST. And they are very excited to deepen the relationship with us, which we are reciprocating now, and that's how it came to be that I was invited, that FIST, it was really FIST that was invited to participate in what was the end of the 25th year celebration of the founding of the Socialist Students Front. The Socialist Students Front had sent a solidarity statement with the actions that happened on March 4, and for those who are in the know, as I was starting a couple of statements before, there was a major action on March 4 around the country in 33 different states, at 110, I think, different campuses or schools. Tens of thousands of students took to the streets to defend public education. The call for education is a right for all, and it was really the first nationwide demonstrations against the economic crisis, the latest manifestation of which is the austerity budgets. That's what they are, the austerity budgets that are being forced on the state and local governments by the banks and the bondholders, so that the interest can be paid on the bonds that have been floated. Right? So tens and thousands of students teachers, educators, other education workers, parents, community activists, and other leaders took to the streets against these attacks. And here in New York City, we had a great demonstrations in front of the building that houses the governor's office, and we marched to Fashion Institute of Technology, where we were protesting the threat to cut student metro cards by the MTA. That was the MTA board hearing. So the Socialist Students Front sent the solidarity letter with March 4, and I'm just going to read it. And it says, "Dear friends, revolutionary greetings. It is our great pleasure to get the chance to express our solidarity to the March 4 National Day of Action to defend education that are being held in the U.S. around the country. Thanks to all who have arranged such a painstaking struggle against the violation of educational rights in the U.S., we express our heartiest solidarity to your movement, especially this March 4 program. Nowadays, the capitalists and imperialists are intensifying their attack on basic human rights, including in the education sector. They are trying to resolve their crisis and maximize profits through privatization and commercialization of education and curtailing budget in education. In Bangladesh, our organization is fighting against the attempt of national capitalists and imperialists to privatize and commercialize education through fees increases, cuts of different student facilities. We feel deeply that in this era of globalization and imperialism, the movement for educational rights should go through solidarity among the student organizations worldwide. We are very much interested to build up and strengthen solidarity with all the organizations fighting in the U.S. for this cause. We would be pleased if you informed us of the contact details of each organization. Keep in touch. Wishing March 4 Day of Action every success with revolutionary greetings. Central Committee, Socialist Students Front of Bangladesh." The day after, March 5th, which was a Friday, a letter was sent from the Socialist Students Front to members of FIST, and I'm going to read that as well. It says, "It is our great delectation to inform you that the Socialist Students Front of Bangladesh is celebrating its Silver Jubilee anniversary throughout 2009 and 2010, organizing various movements and programs demanding democratic right of education and protesting the commercialization and privatization of education in Bangladesh. The celebration will end up through a huge gathering of mass students, current and ex-leaders, supporters, and well-wishers of the organization. There will be held a grand rally and procession in Dhaka on the 30th of March 2010. The demonstration will raise the demand to establish a universal, non-discriminatory, secular, scientific, one-channel education system in Bangladesh. An international seminar on commercialization and privatization of education will be held the next day in Dhaka. The title of the seminar will be decided within a few days. We cordially invite you to this occasion to address the rally in a seminar. We feel the great necessity of international solidarity among students movement worldwide. The attack of commercialization and privatization on education has increased multifold globally in the name of globalization and liberalization. The greedy national, multinational capitalists want to make education a high-profit commodity. The capitalist states are violating and shattering the right of education for all, cutting education budgets and increasing fees on students. So it is the urge of time to protest attacks on education and build international solidarity among student organizations. We deeply feel that a delegation from your students' organization, the Silver Jubilee of SSF, Socialist Students Front, will benefit the attempt of building solidarity between students' movement of both countries. Please reply to us with revolutionary greetings, President, Socialist Students Front. So when I was able to receive the letter, when myself and other members of FIST were able to receive the letter, it was after the high of March 4 here in New York and what happened around the country, the actions that occurred in Raleigh, North Carolina, Cleveland, throughout California, Detroit, around the country really, many of us were on a high, and this really just kept our head above the clouds. Because it is important, you know, for us to build those international contacts with other student organizations around the world. Because though it might be cliche, the children are our future. And we have a world that is being handed to them with a downgraded environment because of the exploitation of peoples and the planet that we live on. Right? We just had an oil rig that sunk in the Gulf of Mexico. 11 workers lost their lives. We just had 29 workers in the coal mine die because of the malfeasance of the coal company that had all these violations and had never paid a fine and refused to actually address those violations. These things threaten our environment, but we also have this restructuring that's happening in the capitalist system. And what that actually means for young people, not just in the imperialist centers like the US and Western Europe, but around the world. So the opportunity to be able to go to Bangladesh and politic with the students there was a great opportunity that will continue to pay dividends, especially because of the fact that there were students from India and Nepal that we were able to continue building our relations with, and especially what's happening in Nepal is very exciting for revolutionaries around here and around the world, because it was within I don't know how many years, you know, it was the most recent armed struggle that overthrew the monarchy and the monarchy that existed in Nepal. And they're pushing forward to build a socialist society. So first, getting in Bangladesh, my first impressions, this is my first time in South Asia. I have been fortunate enough throughout my political career to go to a number of different countries for political reasons, but this is my first time in South Asia. So, you know, it was a very long trip, and it's a 10-hour time difference from New York City. So obviously I was very tired. I was disoriented. But to see, after landing and getting out of the airport and being picked up, first of all, I would say that the hospitality of people in Bangladesh, people in the US could learn a great deal about hospitality from anywhere around the world, really, be it Cuba, Venezuela, Bangladesh, you know, Palestine. People in the US have a lot to learn about hospitality, because when I first arrived there, people just, they didn't want, you know, and no one really wanted to lose track, because they didn't want anything to happen to me, to get lost. You know, when I got sick, I got a stomach illness, everyone was just saying, "Are you okay?" Every minute, everybody kept checking, "Are you okay? We don't want you to be sick." You know, it's very important to us that you not get sick and you not go home sick, and that you be well so you can continue to meet with us and enjoy the sights and sounds and smells of Bangladesh. And it was very sweet, you know, and it was this personal solidarity between human beings, not only because we were part of the leftist movement from around the world, but because we're human beings and we don't wish the worst on anyone, except for, you know, the ruling class. The hell with them, they get sick. You know, I'm not going to hand them a tissue. So the hospitality from the very beginning, when I first got there, picking me up, and I was drowsy. I must have, you know, looked like a zombie. I sure felt like one. But driving through Dhaka, we talk about traffic jam here. This is nothing. I mean, it might take you an extra 20 minutes, but the traffic jams in Dakar are some serious traffic jams. And it's because of the level of underdevelopment that has existed there. The streets are narrower, and the primary means of transport is the rickshaw. A lot of people use rickshaws, and the workers who actually drive the rickshaws are some of the most oppressed workers that you'll see in this society. It's a very hard job pulling somebody along on a rickshaw. But you know, meeting the comrades of the Socialist Students Front, you know, and all the questions they had, people have many questions about what's happening in the U.S. See, because a lot of people around the world don't know there's a left movement in the U.S. Because of how oppressive the U.S. has been, and because of how the society and what comes out from the U.S. around the world is this degenerated culture that exists here, and people are unaware of the movement here. Because, you know, on March 4 here, we all saw it in New York City. There was a whiteout on the news. It is almost, if you weren't there, it just didn't happen. So imagine what it's like around the world. People don't see the things, the struggles that happen here, a lot of them. I mean, you can't completely wipe things out because information travels very quickly. Somebody just can get a cell phone camera, they can put it on YouTube and send it around the world. But the major media does not report a lot of the events that happen on the left here. So people had many questions about the left movement here, and about who was involved in March Forward education struggle. What are the prospects for it going forward? What is the struggle like in general? How many young people are involved? Are the communists leading the way? You know, what is the potential for revolution in the United States? Things like that, the anti-imperialist struggle. You know, so the questions came hard and fast. You know, but I was also able to glean a lot about, you know, what is happening there. Because it is, you know, you have to really look around even here to find out a lot about what's happening in the struggle in Bangladesh. And the student movement there, which has been throughout the struggle of Bangladesh, going all the way back before it was an independent country and it was fighting, you know, how in South Africa the Soweto uprising was around the Afrikaners forcing their language upon the South African people, and it led to an uprising of tens and thousands of people that was part of the anti-apartheid struggle in general. Well, there was a similar struggle that existed in Bangladesh, the language movement, when Pakistan forced Urdu on the people of Bangladesh. Most people speak Bengali. Some people speak Urdu, but it was designated as the only national language of Pakistan. At that time, Bangladesh was called East Pakistan. And the student movement was at the very forefront of that, and I was able to... I didn't hear that, but we'll have questions afterward. And at that time, the Dhaka University, which is the first university that I actually visited in the capital, one of the major demonstrations that happened, and I think that was in 1952, came from Dhaka. So they have monuments that they took us to see and pay homage to the students who lost their lives fighting against, you know, the government, against this law that Urdu would be the national language. And students were also at the forefront of the national liberation struggle that had started. I mean, it had been going on for a while, but it was after a cyclone in the country and the neglect by the government that was one of the. I think the same thing happened in Nicaragua after, was it a hurricane or earthquake that happened in Nicaragua? Earthquake happened in Nicaragua. It was sort of a catalyst for a movement that led to a revolutionary overthrow. And it was a similar thing that happened in Bangladesh, and there were students at the forefront of that as well. But the Socialist Students Front, which is the organization that invited FIST to participate in this action, they were celebrating the end of the 25th year. They were founded in 1984, and around 10 demands about the right of education for people. And I just wanted to read a couple of those demands because they're universal demands. And the situation in Bangladesh is much different than it is here because it is a so-called third world nation. And so the access to education is much different than we have here. Of course, we know in the United States, oppressed people the dropout rates and the access to quality education, you don't have that in a lot of communities. And just briefly, before March 4th happened, FIST had written a statement about, it was based off of Naomi Klein's book, I'm trying to look for it, and it was called Defend Public Education from Disaster Capitalism. And when we were talking to, and I'll get to the points, the demands, when we were talking to the principal of this co-located school the other day, he was talking about the reality of the fact that the schools have been underfunded for a very long time in the inner city. And from their perspective, from his perspective, what they were saying, this is the thing that these organizations that get these charters, when they go to the families and say, isn't your school bad? Isn't it underfunded? You don't have the desks you need. You don't have the books you need. You have 40 children per classroom. The facilities are falling apart. The infrastructure is crumbling. We have the answer for you. And of course, we would agree that all those things are happening in the public educational system around the country in the inner cities, but privatization is not the answer. Capitalists have never provided a better option for people. As a matter of fact, it may look good and shiny now, and even one of the teachers came out and he's like, oh, well, this is how much I make. Wait 5 years from now and see what happens to that school. Because they've done studies on charter schools. When they first have an infusion of cash, they look differently 5 years from that point. But for us, it is a struggle for the resources, because the funding exists for those schools. It's been purposely drawn away from those schools in the inner cities, and that's related to the racist nature of this system and capitalism. So we see in the inner cities and on reservations and pueblos throughout the country that the educational system is different, the access to a good education is different, and so it leads to higher dropout rates. Plus, when you tie that to the racism within the education, and that young people aren't necessarily interested, especially indigenous people, going to school and learning about how in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and looking at him as some sort of hero, or looking at any of them as heroes when they were really, in our minds, of the oppressed. If you're black, if you're Latino, if you're indigenous, they were just an extension of your oppression. But some of the, part of the 10-point demands, at least I'm going to read the second, third, and fourth. The second one is, under the compulsory education system, the students must be provided with uniform dresses, food, books, and the materials of education free of cost. There must be medical center and educational institutions. Appointment of a permanent physician. Teachers, students, employees must be provided with a health card and regular checkup. The supervision of education institutions cannot be left to any non-government organizations. Higher education must be free for all. Fees cannot be imposed on higher education. None of the courses should be launched on commercial basis. There must be at least one university each district. Subjects of education must be secular and scientific in order to make the students understand the difference between vulgarism and higher culture. Music, dance, painting, performance art, recitation, and physical exercise must be made compulsory in education courses from primary level. See, these are, especially the one about higher education must be free, that is something that we're fighting for here. They don't have as many of the institutions that we have here. I think there are 20 or 21 public universities there, and there's about 50, maybe even more than that, private universities there. We have much more than that here in the United States. But the public universities that we used to have that used to be free, such as CUNY and such as the UC system in California, they ceased to be free in the 70s. I think 76 is when they started charging throughout the CUNY system here. And ever since then, the prices have gone up. Since 2000 alone, the price of higher education in public universities has doubled and tripled in a lot of cases. And of course, the fees for private education has gone up as well. And they have always been, priced much higher than public education anyway. So the first day, when we had the rally that occurred at the university, at Dhaka University in the capital, it was, I don't know when many of us here participated in the anti-war demonstrations before the Iraq war began, when there were hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. But if we were able to see tens and thousands of socialists in a crowd in the US, what that would mean to us. And that's what it was like there, because when we were brought to the stage, and from the stage, in all directions, you just saw a sea of people, and you couldn't see the end of it. When we dream of that here, we dream of the possibility of having tens and thousands of people that we can call comrade, and that are fighting for a revolutionary overthrow of the status quo. They have tens and thousands of members in the Socialist Party. The Socialist Student Front is everywhere. We went throughout the country, Dhaka, Sylhet, Chittagong, and everywhere we went, we were greeted by students in a demonstration with chants against U.S. imperialism and chants for socialism everywhere that we went. And everywhere there was a panel that was set up. And it wasn't, you know, sometimes we would go to rooms that were maybe half the size of this room, and they'd be completely filled, people standing along the wall, everywhere that we went. And so it was a very enlightening thing to be able to see. And the amount of respect, you know, that the people have for the Socialist Party and the Socialist Students Front, you see it. We went to one of the tea fields in Sylhet, and we talked to some of the workers, and this is very backbreaking work, people working 12 hours, much of it within the hot sun, stooped over picking tea leaves, and it's very low pay. And we were able, and they organized amongst the workers in the tea fields, and we were able to meet and talk to some of those workers about the conditions and the struggles there. And it's to be able to go. I mean, the U.S. is a large country. Bangladesh is relatively small. It's a very densely populated country of 150 million people, but it's a small country. So it's not as expansive as the U.S. After the revolution, we're going to have to give over a third of Mexico back to the Mexican people, and a lot of the other territories that have been conquered, like Alaska and Hawaii and Puerto Rico. So it's going to shrink the size of the U.S. considerably, but we're okay with that. We're revolutionaries. But if we could just imagine anywhere that we go, there were comrades there. And not just a few handful of comrades, but dozens and maybe over hundreds of comrades there, and the impact that would have on the struggle. And you can see that being there, that there's a major impact that the socialist movement has on the struggle there in Bangladesh. And it's because the conditions are much more different. The conditions are much stark. You see that when you travel throughout the country. Bangladesh hasn't built itself off of the super exploitation of the third world to build itself up like the U.S. has. They have been facing U.S. imperialism and Indian expansionism, and they're still under the gun of that. So, because of the conditions and the conditions of life there, and the conditions, being under the gun constantly, the movement is larger and it is stronger there. But they look to the movement here as being very important. Everywhere that I've been around the world, when I've been able to travel and meet with people, people always talk about the importance of a movement, of a struggle here in the U.S. and the necessity for it. Because what people just want is they want a reprieve. They want imperialism off their back. Because if imperialism is off their back, then it makes their own ruling elite that much weaker. And that's why they look to a struggle in the U.S., which bogs the ruling class in the U.S. down with having to worry about the workers getting ready to overthrow them. And we don't expect it to come today. We don't expect to go home tonight and read about the workers, barricades going up and workers taken to the streets. But we, as revolutionaries, are optimists, and we believe that it's going to happen. Maybe it'll happen in our lifetimes. Maybe it'll happen a few years after we leave. But we know what's going to happen because we know that the system builds its own demise within it. But I think that one of some of the things that we're doing, see, the students there, they know a lot about some of about Bailout the People Movement International Action Center, and they very much look to the things that we are doing, and they look to what we're doing on May 1st, and they look to what we're doing about the jobs program, and they understand it. They understand it because these are things, when we talk about jobs for all, what we are in a jobs program, we are talking about something that makes sense. If you talk to somebody on the street, they know they have a right to a job, they deserve a job, and that there's money to provide jobs for them. They understand that. But we know as revolutionaries that it's one thing that weakens the system. We know that although it's something that's completely realistic to the person out on the streets, to the capitalists, they see it as being something unrealistic. So it pushes our struggle forward. And I think that the directions that we are going, the things that we are doing May 1st, May 8th, and everything that we plan beyond then, with the perspective that we have, is very important. And the revolutionary organizations around the world, like the Socialist Party of Bangladesh, they're in solidarity with us. And so we should continue to build our relationship with them. We should find a way to bring some of the students that we were able to see, that Comrade Sarah was able to meet over there, to bring them here, take them on a tour here, and see what it is like here, and extend the same compassion and solidarity that was extended when we were over there when they arrived here. We should figure out how to do that. So they can see what the movement looks like and the conditions and the difficulties that we deal with here, even though the conditions obviously are not as harsh as they are there. So, I've been speaking for a long time. There's a lot that I would like to say. There's a lot that I'd like to be able to show. I don't have any pictures because my camera was broken going through the metal detectors. And I wish I can sort of open up my mind and, well, that would hurt. But I wish that there was some way to tap into the things that I saw to show you exactly what I was able to see and my feelings about it. One of the things, and I'll leave, that the comrades would always say there is that when they were talking about Sarah, they said, Sarah was full of energy. I said, that's Sarah. Sarah will go, 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 go. That's Sarah. She's full of energy. And it was like, she was so excited about everything. And they said, you're a very serious person, aren't you? I was like, yeah. I'm much more quiet, and I'm not, it's not that I am not excited. I just express it in a different way. But I was very excited and honored to be able to go on this trip to represent FIST and to represent the party. And we are known internationally, we are accepted locally, and let's continue to build our fraternal relations with the comrades in Bangladesh and Nepal and around the world.